Hello there, I'm K-Ball, and welcome to Human Skills, where I interview tech industry leaders about all the non technical skills that go into success in the tech industry. Jossie Haines has been a technical leader in some of the biggest name brands in tech, working in management, director, and VP level roles at companies like Zynga, Tile, and Apple. Which makes it all the more interesting to me that in her role now as an executive coach, she has leaned heavily into joy, playfulness, and a lot of other topics that might sometimes be considered a little woo woo. In our conversation, we dug deep into that line of thinking, exploring what it means to thrive, how uncovering and tapping into our innate senses of joy and play can help us as leaders, and diving into the tactical underpinnings of how seemingly more woo things like positive intelligence and visualization can help us even in our work in the tech industry. Please enjoy this interview with Jossie Haines. Jossie, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Kevin. So glad to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you on. Let's maybe start. Can you introduce yourself, a little bit of your background, and how you came to care about these things I've been calling human skills?
Yeah, so like I said, I'm Josie Haines. I'm currently a leadership coach focused on women in technology and empowering them to thrive. And so I've been in the tech industry for 23 years, worked on a lot of large scale consumer technologies. I was most recently the VP of software engineering and head of diversity, equity, and inclusion at Tile. Prior to that, I worked on Siri. So I worked on Siri Music. My team built over 30 different features for the HomePod, and then also worked on Siri on Apple TV, got a technical Emmy for that integration. I worked at Zynga on a number of all the Ville games back in the days, Farmville, Chefville, Cityville. I worked on a lot of so I've been an engineering leader on the software side for 13 years, been in the tech industry and engineering for over 23 now, and decided to leave my corporate role in July of last year to really follow my passion around helping women in tech thrive in this industry and figure out, it's a very male dominated space, but there is such a unique space for us, and our voices are very much needed so we can build better products, because a lot of technology doesn't truly fulfill the needs of women and other underrepresented minorities.
Totally. Well, and I have to say, the engineering team that I worked on that was probably the best experience to work on was the one that was led by women and had rough, close to even distribution of women and men. The set of perspectives that you have to incorporate to support a more diverse team helps everyone.
Absolutely.
I'd love to start actually with this question. You said helping women in tech thrive, and I want to kind of dig into what you mean by thrive. I think this is something that has actually been a theme coming up of like we can do our work and be in our work, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we're thriving. Like what does that mean to you?
Yes. Thriving for women in technology, and actually for folks in general, right? But let's focus on the thriving for women in tech first. So often we feel like we're the only ones in the room, we're not being heard, we're not getting paid as much, we feel there's a lack of promotion, we have to prove ourselves versus our male counterparts are getting promoted based on potential, right? And so that's definitely one aspect that I lean into. But another aspect of thriving is leaning into asking the people I work with, what is it that you really want? Because so many of us, I say, are high achieving, good girl people pleasers. And we've spent our entire careers doing what everybody else wants us to do, right? What we were praised for, what we were rewarded for. And I work with so many women who get to being in the industry for 20 or more years, and all of a sudden they wake up one day and realize, I don't know why I'm doing what I'm doing, and I'm not happy, and I don't know what's going to make me happy. And so I work with a lot of folks and help them figure out first, what is it that you really want? right? And I mean, it's fascinating sometimes how ingrained this can be. I was speaking to a client a few months ago, and I said to her, "What is it that you loved doing when you were a little girl?" And her answer to me was, "Well, there's all these things that I used to do, but I did them because I got praised for them." Right. And so I said, like, let's get some more play into your life. Like, what do you want to do for fun? And so that's one aspect of thriving. And another one is, again, we're because we feel it's lonely at the top, and the biases that come into play, you know thriving can also mean that we're overcompensating so often to try to succeed in our careers, and we're so used to being the caregivers that we put our priorities last. And so a big part of what I also focus on is, what are those small skills like self care, journaling, like going out for a walk in the middle of the day, that are going to actually help you succeed and show up as a better leader? And like, that's a practice for everybody. And then it's also a lot of mindset shifts, right? Again, and I think this impacts really everybody in this industry. We're kind of sold on this. All right, to be quote unquote successful in tech, you need to have like a huge purpose and be changing the lives of millions of people. And you need to be constantly going after that next promotion, that next pay raise. And if you're not doing that, you're failing. And I call BS to a lot of that, because what that ends up doing is leading to a lot of people thinking that they're not, that they're failures, that they're not worthy. And so I work on a lot of, but you are worthy just for being you as an amazing individual human being. And the part that gets triggering to everybody when I tell them is, if you delivered nothing else for the rest of your life, you would still be completely worthy. And it's really helping them realize that their worthiness comes from within, and that can really help them thrive in this industry.
Yeah. Wow. There's so many different pieces that you just highlighted that I think are going to give us fertile room for conversation. Um, so there's the aspect of equity. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that that is an important thing to acknowledge, right? If
Yeah.
you are disadvantaged because you are a woman in a male dominated field, or because you are black in a white dominated
Mm-hmm.
industry, or other different things, it's hard to thrive until you can get some amount of equity, at
Yeah.
least of opportunity and respect.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think we can talk about some of the aspects that go into doing, like how you can approach that. I don't want to over index on that in this conversation, because I actually have a few different folks who've talked about that, and where I'd really love to dig into actually with you is this idea of kind of asking this question: what is it that you really want? What do you do for fun? Like, how do you bring that up? Because I think I a phrase I heard somewhere is, tech and banking and consulting and a lot of these high powered industries thrive on, there's a phrase that I'm blanking on, but it's like high anxiety overachievers, like people who
Mm-hmm.
just like are used to getting a lot of stuff done, and they use their anxiety and pressure to make themselves get things done. And we fall into this pattern of doing work, succeeding in the measurements of others, and driving ourselves nuts, and
Mm-hmm.
like completely losing track of what it is that we want to do and what makes us happy. So unraveling that is a whole can of worms, and I'm kind of curious, how do you approach that? Like, what if somebody's listening to this and like, wait, that's me? Like, how would they go about identifying what it is that brings them joy?
Yeah. And, so I have a few questions that I tend to have people really walk through, because it's so true. It is so common. I used to go through what I would call my 3-month burnout cycles, right? Which is, I'd take a vacation or a break, I'd come back well rested, I just, work really hard, and then I'd burn out. and I do it over and over and over again. And because we're such high achievers, we're constantly just looking for that next success. And the thing is, for so many of us, we're so good at what we do that we're not celebrating the wins along the way and realizing that we are really successful. And then also, when we're feeling failure, that is a normal human emotion because we live in such this like social media world where everyone's just posting like everything's good. I had a coaching call very recently with a client, and she was like telling me, like, I feel like a failure again, Josie. I thought we had dealt with this a few months ago. And I said, no. And she's like, am I alone? Is this just me? And I was like, no, absolutely not. But we don't talk about the fact that we do all end up feeling failure. And guess what? Like there's the law of polarity. For us to feel true joy and happiness, we also have to be able to feel sadness and frustration. And so it's okay. It is normal human emotions. And so if you're listening to this and you're like, oh my gosh, I so resonate, right? So take some time to reflect in both your personal and your work life. So starting with your work life, right? Look at jobs that you've enjoyed doing and what are aspects of them that you truly enjoyed, right? And then take the time to think about, did I enjoy doing this because I intrinsically enjoy doing it, or because somebody else told me I should enjoy doing it, or I was rewarded for it? Because what it ends up being very true is, similar to how I was speaking about earlier, we get the dopamine hit of that external praise and validation. And sometimes we really need to journal out and reflect, is this something I actually enjoy doing, or is this something I just get praised to do? And then I have people look at it in their personal life as well, right? What are your hobbies? So often people in tech do not have hobbies. And I'm like, you need to have some hobbies here. It doesn't have to be something crazy, right? I mean, for me, it's building Legos and painting, drawing a little adult coloring books, right? Like, and I love to read on my hammock in my backyard. But I realize when I get so out of touch with those things, because again, one of the pitfalls I see on the personal side with high achievers is we can focus on personal self-development and think that those are hobbies. And I'm all for personal self-development. Like I love, self-development, but I notice when I get too far down the self-development rabbit hole, I am not focusing enough on doing the things that just light me up and bring me joy. So what are things that you do just because they bring you joy? And this is where that question of what is it that you did as a little kid that brought you joy? And again, really reflecting on, does this bring you joy truly, or is it because you were rewarded and praised for it?
Yeah. Well, and I think something you said there strikes me, right? Like, it's not to deny that it feels good to be praised.
Mm-hmm.
It does feel good to be praised.
Of course.
But that is fleeting. Mm-hmm. And it keeps you chasing after it in a way that things that kind of in their own intrinsic, they bring you joy more intrinsically do not, where
right.
Something you can relax with a book in your hammock in your backyard, regardless of if there's somebody out there who's watching, or this is the hot new thing or whatever. Like that's a reliable source that you can always go to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I mean, I think, for me, as I've been on this journey of, leaving my corporate role, like I've had lots of very high visibility, large scale corporate roles. At Tile, I was working with a lot of partners. So I talked to tons of people in this valley and was constantly getting that external dopamine hit. And, since I've been doing this for the last year and a half, one of the things that sometimes comes up for me is, oh my gosh, but am am I losing my touch? Like, are people going to not want to talk to me in a few years if I don't have this like corporate role backing me and all these things? And I've really learned to tune into no, I mean, I am still developing my skills. I am really helping other people thrive. And that is so much more rewarding to me than products I've built. Like, most likely over the 23 years I've built stuff in tech, products I've built have been used by billions of people. And yet the like, the hundreds of people I've helped so far, like that's just so much more impactful from a personal rewarding point of view. And because I also know it's not just those individuals, there's the ripple effect of all of the people in their lives who it's also helping. Right. And so I think again, I'm not saying that everyone should go leave their corporate gigs, like that's not the point, but it's also really tuning into you don't have to just follow the traditional, just go up the career ladder, keep getting promoted, working on bigger things paradigm, right? Like maybe right now you want to focus on growing your family. And so staying at your current level where you enjoy what you're doing. And I'm not saying you're coasting, but you're doing a good job, but you're not also trying to kill yourself is like the way to
Totally.
go.
Well, and I love that you brought up the family piece because it highlights that there are seasons
Yeah.
in our lives, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we are not machines. We don't continuously operate on go mode. I when I my first son was born, shortly after that, I stepped back and I worked as a freelancer, so I could work
Mm-hmm.
part time and spend 20 hours a week working because I still enjoyed the work, but spend much more time with my son, and I spent much less focus on advancing my career side, and that was great. And at the time, I thought maybe I'll do this forever. And you know what? 2 or 3 years later, I thought, no, I'm ready to go back to more.
Mm-hmm.
Like you can give yourself the grace to go up and down in your levels of intensity. I think is
Yeah.
um, the
And
piece
not
there.
make it wrong, right? Because I think so often when we slow down, and I think again, especially for women, we've been sold this story that we can do it all with no help. We have to be the Wonder Woman who does it all. We can have the career, the job, the family, and it's all we can magically do it all. And like that is fiction.
It's complete fiction. And the other thing on the subject of what women get sold, y'all get a lot more guilt applied too, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
so my wife and I both are working parents. We deal with a lot of navigating our responsibilities and trading off and like who's doing what and all of that. And nobody applies dad guilt at me when I
Mm-mm.
can't do it all. But
Right.
mom guilt is a thing because it just like it keeps showing up.
Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely. And so that again goes back to that self-worth piece and
Mm,
realizing, it does not matter what anybody else thinks, right? And so often, like, I forget the exact quote, but Eleanor Roosevelt has this great quote about like, we wouldn't focus so much on what other people think if we realized how little they were actually thinking about us, right? And that's not the exact phrasing, but that's basically a close paraphrasing of it. And it's so true, right? But yet we are sold this like, we have to do it all and you need to keep progressing in your career or you're going to be stuck forever. And then also, like the pay, like you have to just keep getting more and more and more and more, and it's like, to what end?
yeah. So okay. So coming back into this, one of the things you said about mindset shifts. How
Mm-hmm.
might we shift our mindset? Say that we still want to be involved with more traditional work, but we're
Mm-hmm.
saying okay, the traditional ladder, that mindset is not serving me anymore.
Yeah.
How would you then work with someone to help shift into other possible mindsets around work?
Yeah. So I see this again in this pattern where, people want a promotion, right? And so I tell them step back and say, all right, I completely agree. You deserve this promotion, right? Sometimes the work life is not fair. Like, I just have to admit, like, hey, the corporate world is not fair. You might deserve this promotion and you might not get it, right? And I'm not saying you shouldn't get it and you shouldn't fight for it, but we drive ourselves crazy sometimes going after that next promotion. And that's where I, again, have people step back and think about the self-worth piece, right? What really reflect on, I am worthy just for being me, right? I have people have affirmations around their worth, their value, their abundance, their ability to attract and magnetize things to them. And then also tuning back into, what are the parts of your job that truly make you happy and light you up? And how can you do more of those and delegate the things that are not in your zone of genius, that you don't enjoy doing as much? Because that tends to be much more in our control as leaders than whether and when we're going to get that next promotion or pay raise or title.
Totally. Um, can you expand on the zone of genius? Because I think that's a really useful concept.
Yeah, so zone of genius is, it's a combination. It's like beyond your strengths, even, right? Because we all have strengths, but it's really taking those to a next level and being like, what is it that I am personally uniquely suited to do through my combination of strengths that I love doing, right? And it's that other part too, because there are things I am very good at, but I'm going to be bored out of my mind doing. But when you're in that zone of genius, that's when you get into flow, right? When you start doing something and hours go by and you produce like amazing things and you don't even feel like it was work, like that's when you know that you're in your zone of genius. And realizing, and this really goes a little bit back to the diversity piece, is so often, we end up hiring people that are like ourselves, but that actually ends up being problematic, because what we really want is people with vastly different zones of geniuses so that we can complement each other and also provide more diverse ideas so that we can build better products to fulfill more people's needs.
Totally. I have a thing that I've worked with both with people I've managed, but then also when I've coached people, that is like looking at your weaknesses and then asking the question, what if I didn't have to fix this, but I could find
Mm-hmm.
somebody else or a tool or something else to just take this set of things off of my plate?
Yep.
Um, like, to your point, if I hire people who are just like me, they're going to have very similar weaknesses and we're going to be
Mm-hmm.
stuck, and
Yep.
you're going to have to power through these things that are annoying and painful and frustrating. But the things that I hate doing, there are people out there that love them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is why when I see teams only hiring like senior engineers, I'm like, you're really missing out. Because, yes, you might have to train those junior engineers and spend a little bit more time mentoring them than another senior engineer. But you're also missing out on people who are going to love something that you might think is very boring grunt work, because it is a new thing that they are learning to do.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I think talking about this zone of genius and the things that are fun for you at work brings us into another question, which is really kind of the role of joy and play at work.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think we often trap ourselves in some ways of thinking, oh, it's work. It's got to be button down, grind it out, go like, hardcore mode or whatever. And like, honestly, to me, work works better when it's fun.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yes.
anyway, sorry, I just love to get you're talking a lot about these things and I think you've probably seen it some with your clients. So I'm curious how you think about this, how you explain it to folks, and how you get people kind of just being more playful at work.
Yeah. And again, I think this goes into we build better products when we're more playful, right? I think so often I talk about the fact that we don't do brainstorming and decision making in a very good way, because those two things should be totally separated. And the more play you have, actually, the better your brainstorming is going to be. Again, leading to better products, right? So a lot of people first just have this resistance of like, Josie, aren't we supposed to be, like you were saying, like it's work. We should be working hard, not taking breaks. And I'm like, well, no. If you keep filling up your emotional and happiness cup, you will be a better leader because you will have more possibilities and think about more open and creative answers to these questions, right? This is the whole, if we get into the whole positive intelligence topic, this is really looking at it from that sage perspective, right? Of using empathy and creativity and all these positive emotions to really create more amazing things. And so play and joy does not mean like you're going to kick back and just play video games all day at work, but it's how can you do this in a more fun way? How can you do this in a way that aligns with your energy, right? Because we all, like I've realized over the many years that I tend to be more productive around like 3 to 6 or 7. Like that's kind of my sweet spot for creation. And so, I spent many years trying to fight that and become the morning person, because everyone always says like you're more productive in the morning and all of that. And I finally just was like, let me lean into when I feel most productive and do the things that I enjoy doing in those times then. And maybe I'll set up meetings earlier, right? So bringing in that joy and play also sets such an amazing example for our team members as well. Going back to the, being an effective leader, you don't want to be this like controlling person who's just trying to, call out people's mistakes, because again, you're not going to be getting the best of them. So if you can really allow everybody to work in the most effective ways possible for each and every person, and again, respecting that diversity, that it's going to be different, right? That is going to bring so much more joy into people's lives, all right? And for one employee, that might mean, hey, I want to take a break in the middle of the day for lunch to have lunch with my kids who happen to be homeschooled or something like that. And for somebody else, that might mean, hey, I go on a few walks a day to clear my head. And it's about really respecting that time. But we're so afraid. Like I've literally worked with people who I said like, hey, when I used to work at Tile, I had a very busy, I was a VP, right? So I had a very traditional manager's schedule where I was booked all day, every day. But 3 times a week for an hour, there was a block for Pilates, because Pilates is my jam. And everybody knew, you do not book over Pilates because Josie will not show up. Like this is a non-negotiable.
Totally.
And I had one person tell me like, well, Josie, you can do that because you're a VP, but I can't do that as an individual contributor. And I said, no, you absolutely, everybody has the right to do that. And as leaders, the more that we can model that, the more that we can hopefully teach our teams. And no, it's not like this isn't just a privilege I have because I happen to be the VP. Like everybody gets the privilege of being able to take the time I need and get their work done. And I mean, I think one of the fallacies of the fact that we have this like 40-hour work week is, that all came from factory work, right? And the work we do is very different. It is very much mental work, and you cannot do this for 8 to 10 hours a day, all day, every day. And creativity comes in spurts. And again, it's about when you're most energetic. And so going back to play, it's the more that you can allow your team members to enjoy life a little bit, socialize more, like really build team camaraderie and let people play in their own individual ways as well. And realizing, hey, some people are introverts and get energy by going off and doing something on their own. And other people are extroverts and they're going to get energy by going out and socializing with others and really creating spaces for everybody's unique way of finding that energy, joy, and play is what can really help a team thrive.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things you said there really spoke to me, which was around the difference between the type of work that we do and the perhaps still kind of archetypal work that people think of when they think of work. And
Mm-hmm.
people think of work, okay, you go in, it's hours in, it's output out. And that is not the way that creative work works in the
No.
slightest.
Yep.
And, if you are an engineer, you may get more done, more output done
Mm-hmm.
in 2 hours in your top time with no interruptions than you would in 8 hours, like trying to slog through and having things come in and knock you in and out and things like that. So, yeah, this is a culture shift that I definitely try to push in companies that I'm at of let's talk about outcomes, not talk about time. And let's, when we
Mm-hmm.
do talk about time, talk about when are we reserving to be collaborative so that we
Yep.
know that we need to be available for that, and how are we communicating to our teams or to our coworkers about when we are and are not available.
Yeah. And not feeling like we have to be that Slack is now our slave, which means that we have to always be able to respond to Slack in like 2 seconds, right? Like it's just become this like, oh my gosh, if I didn't respond in 2 seconds to somebody, and that is going to break creative flow time. Going back to the zone of genius, sometimes you need to just shut off Slack for a few hours so you can get your work done, and being able to create the space for that is so crucial to productivity. Back in my early career when I was working at NetApp from like 2005 to 2010, I was able to have a pretty flexible schedule, and I think I was in the office from around 11. I showed up somewhere between 11 and noon, and I left around 8 o'clock at night. And I basically ended up being in meetings from around noon to 5, and then I just coded from like 5 to 7 or 5 to 7:30, and that like I produced just as much work as all the other people who were trying to like just do this like throughout the day. And it's just like that's when my peak coding time was, and I was able to deliver my outcomes. So it's so important to let people work when they're going to be most productive.
Yeah. Yeah, for me, the way I set it up, I am that morning person. Sorry, that's just how my body works.
Oh,
Though the output, the flip side is like my brain starts to shut down in the afternoon.
hey.
It's like I just cannot think past, I don't know, 3, 4. Certainly not anything that requires deep focus. But I'll do the same thing of like, okay, anything that requires focus, whether it's software development or deep planning or anything, like that's happening between 6 and 8, and I'm
Mm-hmm.
not doing meetings then. At 6 and 8
Yep.
a.m., I'm doing that. And now, okay, once that time is done, now I can talk to you. Now I can have meetings. Now we can arrange things.
Yep. Yep. Absolutely. And it's really just about respecting, hey, different people are going to have that time in different places. And like you said, it's about figuring out what are the time periods where collaboration is expected, but giving people enough breath of like, hey, we're not blocking over everybody's, potential focus time.
Yeah. So, okay. Coming back, you're an individual contributor. And I love that you highlighted, right? This is not necessarily just a privilege of leadership.
Mm-hmm.
Say you've never thought about taking these times and blocking these times out for yourself before. How would you start? Would you just put it in your calendar? Would you have a conversation? Like where do you begin as you start to flesh out what is actually okay?
Yeah. So one of the things I have people do is as they're going about their day, start measuring, like, and you don't have to do this for too many weeks. Like doing this for a week or two is actually a really good exercise. Is on an hourly basis, like see what your energy is like. Do you feel focused right now? Do you feel like you can be productive? And sometimes it's tied to the thing you're doing, right? So for managers, what I have them do is also look at, hey, if you're in this type of meeting, does this type of meeting bring you energy or does it decrease your energy? To then help them kind of plan where they're going to put things in. And then I think it's also, this is a great for individual contributors, a great managing up strategy, right? Like once you've really figured out if there's not a culture in your company or in your engineering team to set aside focus times for people, right? And do this, it's really having a conversation with your boss about, hey, I was listening to this podcast, people were talking about this focus time thing, and I think it might be something that would be good for us to try out. Like, is this something, that we can try out as a team and bring it up as a team culture and norm, right? And then so often I feel like companies need to have Slack etiquette guidelines, which means that there isn't this expectation that you're going to respond to every single Slack message and every single channel within, a minute, right? Like you're allowed to say like, hey, I'm taking this focus time for myself, right? I think some companies have like a full day where it's like heads down Thursdays or something. And there's like a no meeting day. So people really can get their focus work done. And so there's different ways of scheduling it. And, based on the type of work you do and the type of environment you're in, some of these may work better than others. And so I think it's really a conversation to be had with your boss, but really coming at it from a place of, this isn't about you wanting to slack. This is actually about making the team better and more productive and happier, which is hopefully what we want as leaders.
Totally. Yeah, I think it's really easy to get into, especially when you're as a manager. I think a lot of your work does get done in meetings, and it
Mm-hmm.
can be, you can forget how disruptive those are to
Yes.
the type of focus that is necessary to get creative work done.
Mm-hmm.
And especially if you're, in a company where you're actually not being managed by technical people, which does happen, right? You're an engineer, but
Oh,
your
yeah.
leadership chain is not as technical. They may not have experienced that. And so a reminder that, like, hey, we have to build up all this mental context, and if there's a meeting in the middle, like, that comes crashing down, or there's a Slack message or
Mm-hmm.
something else, like, it can destroy your productivity.
Yeah, anytime we're interrupted and have to do a mindset shift, it takes 23 minutes for us to get back to the thing that we were working on from a full like mind shift perspective. So every one of those Slack messages is massively decreasing the productivity of your team.
Yeah. On a slightly different topic, you briefly mentioned positive intelligence, which is something I know
Mhm.
we have chatted about a little bit outside of this, but it's not something I think that has been shared on one of these interviews before. Do you want to maybe quickly describe it? I think it has the benefit of being very tactical.
Yes. Yeah, so I actually give all of my 6-month coaching clients access to the 6-week positive intelligence course because I've just watched how it's been game changing for leaders. And so, what positive intelligence is, it was created by Dr. Shazad. He's actually a professor at Stanford and teaches there, and has actually used this technique with students, CEOs, athletes, lots of professionals. And it's about the concept of mental fitness. And it's about building this mental fitness muscle and realizing that we have these saboteurs in our brain that are tied to our negative emotions. And those are the things that are really holding us back. And there's, the group of saboteurs, and the lead saboteur that we all have is the judge, and that really judges us. But these saboteurs, they promise us the potential, right? Like one of the saboteurs is actually the high achiever, right? The high achiever promises us if we just keep pushing and pushing and pushing, we'll get that promotion and that raise. But really, it's holding us back because it's not letting us lean back and leverage what he talks about as the 5 sage powers, which are tied to our positive emotions, things like empathy, creativity, leaning into like effective decision making, using the power of yes and to get better brainstorming, right? And all of these sage creative abilities come from our more positive emotions. And so the way to build the mental fitness muscle is through these things he calls PQ reps, positive intelligence quotient reps. And what they are is you only have to do it for 10 seconds, actually, is the smallest PQ rep you can do. And it's really the best way to describe it is being in touch with one of your 5 senses. So, for example, one PQ rep could be rubbing your 2 fingers really intensely and feeling the ridges on your fingertips. It can be very similar to meditation, where you're paying attention to your breath. It could be you're going on a walk and you're feeling the sensation of your feet and your leg muscles as you're walking. It could be listening to the farthest sound that you can hear, or the closest sound and listening to the sound of your breathing, right? And it's really about getting in tune with one of your 5 senses and focusing on that. And, again, people might think that this is a little woo, but there's actually scientific research behind this, where even when somebody just did a 10-second PQ rep, when they did an MRI of somebody's brain, they showed that by just doing the PQ rep, their more sage side of their brain was activated, and it decreased the amount of the saboteur side of the brain. And the reason I love teaching this to especially engineers is I think it's very tactical, it's very logical, and there's a lot of science behind all the research. And it's something you can do in the middle of a meeting when you feel triggered, right? Because, I love to meditate, and I still do like my 5 or 10 minutes of meditation in the morning, but you can't say in the middle of a meeting when you're feeling triggered by somebody else, oh, excuse me, I need to go meditate for 5 minutes so I can come back and finish this conversation in a more sage mindset. But you can definitely sit there and do a PQ rep without anybody even noticing that you're doing it.
Totally. Yeah, I went through this 6-week course you mentioned, and it I think, to me, I would describe PQ reps as their focus practice in one form or
Yep.
another. You're practicing
Yep.
directing your focus to different parts of your senses. And as you highlight, that has some really nice side effects. It takes you
Mm-hmm.
out of, say, you're in a meeting, it's stressful, and your head is spinning on why is this person doing this thing or whatever. That's your focus spinning away on that. And you
Yep.
can do a PQ rep, direct your focus to your sensations for a moment, and you come back and you're out of that like mental doom loop, and you're able to
Mm-hmm.
access more positive emotions and more things that you can do that will probably be more productive in that moment.
Exactly. Absolutely. And if for my clients who've gone through this, not only has it been beneficial for them at work, right? I had one client tell me she now has the best relationship she's ever had with her parents because she was able to leverage this instead of feeling triggered by her parents, and really being able to take in their perspective as well. And so again, this impacts all aspects of your daily life.
Totally. Well, I just realized we're getting pretty close to the end of our time here, and I want to make sure, is there anything that we haven't talked about yet that you think would be important to discuss, well, in our remaining 10 minutes?
Yeah. So, I think one of the things that we had touched on when we were, talking about recording this was like some of the more woo things that I work with my clients on and how they're really tied in to actually being a successful leader, right? And so I touched on a few of these, right? Like, leveraging journaling and reflection prompts, right? Grounding, right? Which is literally the act of walking outside with bare feet in the grass can literally help you clear your emotions. And there is actually scientific research that shows this. This is not just some woo concept, right? Visualization, right? I have like a little minute video on YouTube around like, hey, what are some visualizations for a job seeker? You're about to go into that job interview and what should you do, right? And one of them is take the time, like the 5 minutes before you're about to hop onto that interview call and visualize the end of that interview. What do you want that to look like? What do you want them to be saying? Like, how do you want that conversation to end, right? And this stuff really works. And again, it's so often we think we need to be doing big things, big changes in our lives, right? But what I really found is that it's these little things, these little tools in our tool belt that we start leveraging on a regular basis that are so, so crucial. And another one, the last one I'll touch on is because we're engineers and we're so in our brains all the time, a big thing we do is we don't process our emotions. We ignore them, we push them aside. And so a big process I teach my clients is how to feel your emotions so that you can let them go. Christian Michelson has this process called the peace process. There's many other people who've created their own versions of this. That's literally a guided meditation that you listen to that helps you figure out where in my body am I feeling this emotion? And really, again, just tuning into the sensation in your body so that then you can let it go. And, these are not things that are traditionally being talked about as leadership skills, but yet they really help us thrive, especially going back to kind of one of the conversations we started this topic with, which is it is okay to feel like you're not always succeeding, right? Like failure will happen. And I'll end with this great visualization that a visual that somebody once told me about, which is, for me, one of my challenges as a leader was I'm a people pleaser. And so giving difficult feedback was always a challenge for me. And it's a skill that I worked on over many years. And I've gotten much better at it. But every time I would hit this challenge again, I beat myself up a little bit because I was like, I did this work like a year ago. Like, why is this becoming a problem now? And somebody I was working with said, Josie, this isn't a circle, right? Because that's what we feel like sometimes. We feel like we're just hitting the same problem and we think it's a circle. But instead, take the time to think about it like a funnel, right? Or like a tornado, right? And what you're really doing is, yes, you might be hitting the same concept again, but you're in a different place. You're higher in that spiral or funnel that's going up. And so, yes, you might still be triggered and challenged by having difficult conversations, but you've got all these skills under your belt. So you're now at a new level of mastery. And this is really a journey and not a destination, right? Because we're so often striving for this destination, but there is no destination. So let's slow down and learn to love the process of learning and going through this journey and realizing that it's messy. We're humans. Like that's part of life. And really slowing down and smelling the roses, which ties back to play and joy and fun, because that is going to make us better leaders.
All right, that's it for this Human Skills interview. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking this video and subscribing to this channel. You can also subscribe to the Human Skills newsletter, which there's a link to right down below, to get notified of interviews like this as they come out. Take care, y'all. This is K-Ball signing out.